Welcome everyone to a live session. I'm really excited to be a part of this as always. And in fact, I think I intro this section, this live Q&A session saying that because it's true. I love talking about photography, about editing, and I love sharing my information with you all. It's very, very fun, and I'm always happy to see all of you. Soulful Lens, welcome. Good to see you guys. Jeremy, hello. I'm inside today because it's raining outside, and that's very good for all the buds on the trees and the leaves, which I'm hoping to see very soon. And the only problem is that when I'm inside here with this background, which is my daughter's bedroom and her own painted mural, I don't think I know how to adjust the brightness of the Instagram camera because it's blown out here. And this segues nicely into the first lesson that I have for you all, is that when you're photographing and you have let's just say that you have an Android or maybe an iPhone or even any type of camera, and you're photographing and you see that there is these blotchy spots on people's foreheads or on noses or whatever. Obviously, this is an obvious statement, it's overexposed. Most people would know that, so you would simply underexpose the picture. However, the advantage of RAW, and this is what I like to just intro this about, is that RAW will allow you, to a certain extent, to recover these blown out highlights here. And while it's not perfect, it does allow for that. But here's the problem, is that a lot of people don't have the capacity on their devices or even their cameras or in storage mechanisms to deal with the massive files of RAW. So that's why I would like to suggest, and this is what I do, is that any photos that are not super critical, they're not artistic, I simply just use JPEGs. That would be photos maybe of my family, of my kids going out for a walk in the woods, or photographs of receipts for my business, or snapshots. Maybe I see, something going by that interests me. Those are all in JPEG. But the shots that I either have for clients, or if they're artistic, or that I really value and want to edit more, then I would shoot those in RAW. Okay, so I hope that helps some of you with regards to how do I choose between RAW or JPEG. RAW's great, JPEG's great. They both have their uses and they both have their benefits. So for everyone who's just joined, I'm glad to see you. Please let me know what country you're from or what city. It's always fun to read that for me. And Costa Rica, welcome. Hi sir, how are you? How are you in this quarantine time? I'm doing fairly well, thank you. Mainly because, well, to a certain extent, I love doing these Q&A sessions, and I wait for them every day at 1 p.m. my time, 12 o'clock Toronto. Hi Mark, good to see you back. Raj, thank you so much. Thank you everybody. And for those of you who haven't been here before, we're doing a Q&A session. Feel free to ask me any questions that you want about photography or editing. Manila, excellent, welcome. And also, like I said, I'd love to hear from where you all. Hello everybody. Alessandra, welcome. Great, and feel free to ask the questions in the question mark below. If your question's a bit longer, then the comment section is probably better. Hi from India. Always good to see you. That painting by your daughter is just eavesdropping. Yeah, so beautiful. Father, a photographer, daughter, an artist. Yes, it's so true. And I don't know where she gets her painting talent, but it's extraordinary. And she just decided one day that, hey, Dad, I want to paint mountains on my wall. And well, there we go. And I said, sure. Okay. From India, Kerala, Joel. Welcome, Joel. Hi, I'm a big fan. I'm from India. Gaurashankar, thank you. Can you share your thoughts about the philosophy of exposure to the right in the histogram? Yes. Histogram photography is very confusing to those who don't know the theory of it. And a lot of times what I find, especially in camera clubs, is that people feel a little bit diminished if they don't photograph using the histogram. Now, I'm going to radically go against the prevailing sentiment with regards to histograms. I don't even use them. I've been a professional for 23 years, doing so many different types of professional advertising, commercial photography, studio photography, fashion, portrait, landscape, travel, all that stuff. I don't even bother. And the reason being is because I shoot in RAW, and any slight misstep or misguided exposure with regards to the little mountain range that we call it is pretty much irrelevant to me. Now, I do advise that you learn how to use it, how the left little mountain fits neatly at the bottom left of the frame and the right on the bottom right of the frame. And but to be honest, with raw capture, it's not even that necessary. And I will adjust my exposure to a certain extent if I feel I need to it after the fact, and it's never been an issue. So yeah, I don't even bother to use it. But again, if you want to get into understanding it for theory and possibly for editing down the road, then it's a good idea. Okay, let me scroll back here. Okay. Oh yeah, by the way, thoughts on exposure to the right of the histogram. If I am going to err, in other words, if I'm going to make a mistake, I would tend to err on the side of slight underexposure. And actually, photographers sometimes say the exact opposite. And I can understand it, but here's the thing, is I would prefer to have a darker picture that I can boost up a little bit than to have a picture that is too bright and the highlights are blown out. Now let me give you a little example. Again, I'll say this. Do you see how there's blotchy white spots on my skin? Now when I move back, it looks normal. But when I move closer, do you see how it takes a little while for the Instagram camera to readjust itself? Now let's just say that it didn't readjust and we got a picture with my skin blown out. Then it's really hard to correct that. So I would suggest, if you're going to make a mistake in exposure, make it with underexposure, just a slightly less. Now, you can solve all this by doing what's called exposure bracketing, and that will take a picture underexposed, normal, and overexposed. And that's a really fine idea, especially if you're in a critical situation like wedding photography or fast-moving things like sports photography. However, if you're doing studio work or landscapes, and it's less critical, of course, landscapes, you actually would want to use it for HDR. But I hope that helps. I always say to myself, if I'm going to make a mistake, it's going to be an underexposed mistake. Great question. Thank you for your reply on shutter on D810 from Donegal. Yes, of course. Happy to help out. Okay, Suji. Is there any other paintings on the walls by your daughter? Not yet, but there probably will be, and I will show it at some point. Okay, the Drunken Monk, welcome. Let me know what country you guys are from. I'd love to hear it. What's your opinion about combining art and photography? Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And there's really no, in the world, let me see, I would suggest that with the advent of postmodernism, which, who knows, maybe in the 80s, the lines between genres and lines between art forms really dissipated greatly. And I would say that art and photography and mixing, pastiche, all of these things are totally open to you as a creator. And there's very little limitations put on you with regards to what you want to create. And the only limitations that you would have probably is regards to when you take your artwork into the commercial world. And at that point, you do sort of have to be creating to the audience, in a sense, where if you want to make money from your creations, then you would be creating within a parameter, still within your soul, hopefully, but in a way that's actually commercially viable so that people want it. And you can easily find that out by finding out what is selling. Go to your local art galleries and just ask what styles are selling these days. And if it's commensurate with what you want to do, then definitely push your stuff and don't be afraid to market your own artwork. Okay, Sal Abdul Halim, hello, welcome. And Mark Fowler, good to see you, my friend. Jeremy, I'm trying to get to grips with manual settings and concentrating on either shutter or aperture and setting ISO completely on auto. Is that a good way to go? So Jeremy, what I would suggest, and this is what I suggest in my course, Digital Camera Mastery, the online course, is that everyone start out with aperture priority because it's the easiest. And the reason why I feel it's the easiest, here is the gateway to all the rest of the manual settings, in my opinion. And the reason why I suggest this is because this is exactly what I do. Aperture priority, a low-ish f-stop number, like f5.6, a auto ISO, where the camera chooses the ISO, and you adjust exposure using your exposure compensation dial, and that would be the minus and the plus. And minus makes your picture dark, and plus makes it brighter. Now, a lot of people could say, no, Mark, you don't use auto ISO. You have to dial in your ISO manually. Well, that's true and that's good. However, when you're just starting out and you want to get pictures really quickly, which I advise, I do advise auto ISO. Then, when you figure out how ISO interacts with the other two parts of the exposure triangle, shutter speed and aperture, then you can start dialing in your ISO manually. So let me say that again to everybody. If you're getting off of the auto mode, I advise this: aperture priority, lowish f-stop number like f5.6 or f4.5, and auto ISO. And then you're going to adjust your brightness levels with what's called the exposure compensation dial. Okay, so spend a couple months with just that. And then the next step is to manually place your ISO the way you want to. And you can do that easily because once you get all of your photos a good track record of auto ISO, keep a little notepad and say, okay, during this type of light, the camera chose ISO 800. During this type of light or this type of scene, the camera chose 1600. And if you do that enough, your brain is going to realize, okay, I feel that today is an f5.6 and an ISO 800 with a shutter speed of such and such. And then you can start to really guess the exposure triangle just by looking. And that gets really fun. And that comes through practice. Great question. Photo Canuck. That's a great name. Welcome. Okay. Shahir, thanks for checking my photo. I'm always happy to help. Okay, welcome Philippines, Manila. Hey guys, I'm so glad you. Jason, excellent. I always appreciate going through your profile, Jason. It's a real pleasure. Stunning images. Okay, so I'm gonna. Okay, how can I start my book? How can I start my book, including my photos? Any advice? So, I used to use Apple's books, and that came from their Photos app, but I don't use that anymore. And to be honest, I don't really know much about doing books with photos. If anyone can help out, that would be great, because I've never done one. I assume you're talking about self-publishing books. If you're talking about an actual publisher, a professional publisher, I'm not sure about that either. However, if someone could let us know what they use. Do they use a specific self-printer to print photo books? And we'd love to hear about that. Mark, in LRCC, I'm partial to underexposure and vibrance. I like the pictures warm and, for me, heartfelt. Any tips on how to break away from such partiality? I don't think you need to. I think that you go with whatever your heart tells you, with whatever your soul tells you, and you actually will change that down the road when you feel that you're ready for a new style. However, I wouldn't bother changing it. You keep going with what makes you feel good and don't worry about other genres yet. Now, that's a little bit different when it comes to photography. I do advise that people learn as many photography genres as they can if they're wanting to make money at photography. If they're not looking at photography as a second job or a primary income earner, then they specialize and they do what they love. And with regards to you, if you are editing your pictures to your specifications the way that you love them, then don't bother changing any other ways of editing. Keep it going, and you will be led down the road into different styles as you progress. Very good question. Blurb. Alessandra says blurb. That's what I was trying to rack my brain about, because like I said, I've never done one before, a photo book, but I hear that Blurb does a really good job. So thank you, Alessandra, on that. Excellent. Carmen from Slovenia, welcome. Good to see you all. Okay, I'm going to pop down to the question marks down here. I'll try to go in order if I can. Let's see what we have here. I have taken a moon pic, but moon looks small at 200 millimeter. True. Any tips on how I can edit and make, one second, make it big in Lightroom? Yes, I certainly do. Okay, so most cameras these days are anywhere from like 20 megapixels, 24, even some are up to 36 megapixels. And if I was to ask you what is the most prominent way that people in the world view photos these days, all of you would say, well, on a computer or on a tablet or on an iPhone or an Android. So what I advise you do, you take that photo taken with your 200 millimeter zoom lens, like you suggested, even though it looks very small in your image when you pull it up on screen, all you need to do is crop it for Instagram, Facebook, whatever upload. You crop really tight, so it's a huge moon. Now, of course, you are going to lose what we call dimensional resolution. That's the pixel dimensions of height and width. But what does it matter? You know, the people are looking at this on screen, on your Facebook, on your Instagram. It doesn't matter at all. In fact, if you use that 200 millimeter to capture your moon, and you crop that moon so that the moon is very big within your picture, I can almost guarantee you that it's still going to be higher resolution than Instagram or Facebook can even process. That's true. So you are all set. Don't worry about it. Crop it as much as you like and upload it. Okay? Hope that makes sense. If anyone else has any questions about that, please let me know. One of the great fallacies is that a lot of people think that because they don't have a fancy and expensive super zoom lens, that they can't do things like moon or safaris or anything like that. Well, yes, you can. If you are providing or if you're showing your images primarily online, okay? Because online resolution is very, very small compared to the image of your actual camera. For example, I would suggest that you might have like a, who knows, a 2 megapixel is the, let's just say you had way back in the day, we used to have 3 megapixel cameras very early on. And a 3 megapixel camera from like 15 years ago or more is still more resolution than you're going to see on your Instagram feed. So don't worry about it. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay, sorry, I already answered that one. Okay, let's see what we have here. I use a micro four thirds 40 to 150 millimeter f4 to 5.6. What is the most combination ISO and f-stop that always works for panning to catch a bird? Yes, this is not easy. And by the way, if anyone wants to know what a 4.3 means, that's a micro four thirds camera. And usually micro four thirds are created by Panasonic Lumix. That's a company that makes micro four thirds, and Olympus. And I suspect that you have one of two of those. Now, with regards to bird photography and knowing the lens that you have, the critical aspect is to get the bird sharp, of course, while you're panning. So I would probably suggest if you're photographing in bright daylight, which I assume you are, then you would switch to shutter priority. And usually I'm telling people to go to aperture priority, but In this instance, shutter priority is probably better, and I'll get you to set your shutter speed to 1/1000. If you need to choose auto ISO, then go for it, and just let the camera choose the aperture, okay? So to be honest, the aperture is not as critical when it comes to bird photography when you're panning. And the reason being is because there's not anything behind the bird except blue sky. Now, if there was things behind the bird that you wanted artistically blurry, like a jungle or something, then you would switch to aperture priority. But what I advise is shutter priority 1/1000, and that will probably freeze the bird unless it's a hummingbird. Then you'll have to go up to 1/2000. Okay, so I hope that helps. And panning, yeah, just pan along as if you were in the world of hunting. That's the skeet shooter, and you follow that disc or that discus or whatever it's called, the skeet, and then you just take your shot, but keep the follow through. Excellent question. Okay. Let's see what we got here. How do you deal with the inaccuracies of the on-camera photo preview? Yeah, really good question. It doesn't bother me because when I take a picture with my DSLR or mirrorless and I look at the back of the screen, I'll be honest, I don't really put much weight on that image because, for one thing, if I'm outside, I can't really see it all that well. And I don't really care about it until I get back to Lightroom. So in Lightroom, I consider Lightroom my standard, and that's because I know I have a good screen. It's a MacBook Pro screen. And also, my iPhone has a good quality screen as well. So I don't even bother worrying about that. And because I shoot in RAW, I don't even care, to be honest, so much about the white balance. I can adjust my white balance. Usually I'm on auto white balance, actually. A lot of people are surprised because a professional, should you not dial in your white balance exactly? Not necessarily. I'm all about speed. If I was doing sports photography, if I am doing travel, if I was doing, if I was a wedding photographer, all those things, auto white balance all the time. Because you don't have time to dial in white balance. It's not worth it. Now, that's different when you're doing still life, landscapes, and studio work. In studio work, I would dial in Kelvin white balance. I would be very accurate in my white balance. But when you're out doing on the streets or in the woods or doing stuff where you need to be quick, don't ever bother worrying about the preview image on the back of your camera. It's when you're doing the editing that makes all the difference. Now, if you're someone who does not do editing, but relies on the picture straight out of the camera, by the way, which I admire. I don't ever tell everyone that they have to be editing their photos. In that case, then you certainly will want to be a little bit more careful with something called picture profiles. Now, I got a question today, even before I went online, about picture profiles. What are they? Well, most cameras have what's called a picture profile, and you can access them by looking at your camera manual. And a picture profile allows you to dial in a certain combination of vivid vibrancy or saturation plus white balance and a certain amount of effect. And this would be very good for landscape photographers, for nature photographers. You can have higher vibrance, lower vibrance. You can dial in your pictures for certain genres like landscapes and portraits and so on. And I would really advise you, if you do not edit your photos in any app or any editing software, then definitely look into picture profiles within your DSLR or your mirrorless. Excellent question. Thank you so much. Okay. Shahir says, what do you think about it? Shahir, I must have missed your first question. Let me scroll here so if I can. Shahir, if you wouldn't mind just letting me know what the first part of that question was, I'd appreciate it. Okay, let's check this one out here. Best size to crop for Instagram or Facebook? How to edit to show many features in my moon? Yes. So with regards to cropping for Instagram or Facebook, because it's the moon, I suggest square. And the reason being is square is a very accessible crop. Facebook likes square. And Instagram likes square, and because it's the moon, you're having what's called an equidistance scenario. You have a left and right side that's the same, it's symmetrical, so why not go square? It looks really good. And make sure that the moon is dead center. Now, when you took the picture of the moon with your 200mm lens, usually the mistake that a lot of people make is that they the moon is too bright. They've overexposed the moon. Now you actually have to underexpose that moon if you have the advantage of taking the picture again, because we want to see detail in the craters and we want to see the texture of the moon. Because there's a lot of darkness around the moon, what's going to happen is the camera's going to, by default, jack up that exposure, thinking that you actually want some of that dark sky to be gray. You don't want that. That's why in exposure compensation, you're going to go to the minus side when you're taking a moon shot. Now, if you have already taken the moon shot, which you have, and you still feel that the moon is like a ball of white, of a glowing white, then what you would do is you would take your highlights and your whites down, lower those parameters within Lightroom or Photoshop or any editing software that you have, and take them down to the point where you can start to see detail in that moon face. That's the best you can do. If that still doesn't work, then try to go out again to do a full moon shot, and this time really underexpose that picture. And you want to underexpose it dramatically, really, because you want to see the detail in the moon. Otherwise, the moon's going to be pure white. Excellent question. Okay. Okay, yes, I have it underexposed to -3. Okay, here's something. If your moon shot is underexposed at -3, and you take the picture and you still feel that it's just blown out, it's too bright, then you're going to have to switch to manual. Full manual. Get off of aperture priority and go to full manual. And I would suggest f8, and I would suggest lowest ISO possible, and then you adjust your shutter speed any way that you want to make sure that moon has texture. Okay, so that would be the third unknown parameter, the X parameter. That would be the shutter speed. Okay, let's see what else we have here. For street photography, which lens would you recommend for mirrorless cameras? Yes, a 23mm. Now, Fujifilm make a really great 23mm f2. That's the one I use. And so the reason being is, now my assumption is that the mirrorless camera you're talking about is APS-C size. That would be the middle size of your sensor. If you are using a full frame, mirrorless, for example, from Sony, then or from Canon or Nikon, they also have full frame, then you'd be using a 35mm prime lens. Okay, so just to let people know, there's a difference between the way that we mention or talk about lens focal lengths, depending on if we have a large full frame sensor camera, or if we have what's called a smaller APS-C size frame. Now, I'm not sure what camera you have, but if it is indeed the APS-C smaller frame, then you're going to use a 23mm, or some are 22 or 24, that doesn't matter, it's rough. However, if you have a full frame, you're going to use a 35mm prime lens, okay? And if you're doing street photography, you don't need to be so critical about the super expensive f1.4 lenses. Don't bother. They're a waste of money if you're doing street photography. If you're doing street photography or travel, then just get the cheaper f2 or f2.8 lenses. They're just as good, and they don't cost an arm and a leg. Okay. For those of you who just joined, we're doing a Q&A session. Feel free to ask any questions that you want, and tell us what country you're from. I also love to hear that. Okay, let's see what else we have here. What cameras would you recommend for a newbie undecided about what photography they'd like? Excellent question. I suggest the Fujifilm X-T100. Now, I think they have the X-T200 out now. However, if you're wanting an even better deal, the X-T100 was actually really good. And if you can get that as an after stock or open box sale or used, then it's really inexpensive and it's a great camera. The X-T200 is really good. And in fact, any of the X series Fujifilms in the, what we call them, the consumer range, are really good for learning. And the reason I know this is because I've used a lot of different Fuji cameras, both professional and the consumer, and I can stand by their quality. Okay, and if Fujifilm's listening, I've promoted you guys so much, I really want a sponsorship deal. I think I deserve it. Oh, we'll see. Okay, here we go. For my question about the lens, please consider a crop mirrorless camera. Yes, yeah, good. So you're looking for that 23 millimeter. Sometimes some companies have it at 22 millimeter or 24. But if you think about it, what is 23 times 1.5? It's roughly 35 millimeter. So that's how you figure out, because APS-C size cameras, or we call them a crop sensor, is usually you multiply the number by 1.5 to get the full frame equivalent number. Okay, thank you for that clarity. Let's see what else we have here. I was asking about Capture One 20 to edit photos. Shahir, yeah, I don't know much about Capture One, but I hear really good things about it. So unfortunately, I can't give any real clear guidance on that. However, if anyone else who's listening uses Capture One, if you could please tell Shahir and me what you think of it, then that would be really awesome. Now, I use Lightroom CC exclusively, but I do understand that Capture One has its appeal because I think you can buy it outright instead of pay the monthly fee. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, we're going to scroll over to some questions that are in the comments section. Sankara Market, welcome. Good to see you again. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Give me 1 second while I scroll. Thank you, Mark, for answering my question. Happy to do so. For Ciuti Effecto, what may be the light and a mirror? I'm not sure what that is. Oh, camera settings. What camera settings do we have to do? If you could just rephrase that, I'd really appreciate it, and I'm happy to help out. Okay, Nick, goalkeeper, a super blustery day where I live. I drove by the coast and wanted to capture the waves. My photos are okay, but not great. What's the best way to do this? I only have a 50 millimeter. A 50 millimeter is amazing. In fact, I started my career with only one lens for years, and it was a 50 millimeter f1.8 lens. And that's why I love the 50 millimeter lens. It's so good to learn on. Nick, if you could just clarify, are you wanting sharp wave pictures, or are you wanting smooth, flowing pictures? And then I can get back to you. Okay, Yuki Yamada, welcome. Okay, I'm just going to scroll through. Hey from Japan, yes. Yokoso. I can't wait to get back to Japan. Okay. Alessandra says, I'm struggling with my Speedlight. I have the Nikon SB910 and I wanted to eliminate the room light. Yeah, so Alessandra, with regards to Speedlights, they've never worked well on camera for hardly anybody, to be honest. They work great as fill flashes for wedding photographers. And whenever I'm inside and I have a Speedlight and I want to illuminate the room, I just bounce it off the ceiling. So with your SB910, you can rotate that Speedlight up and you can shoot it off the ceiling and you can get light that bounces around the ceiling. Just put everything in auto to start out with, because it's a little bit confusing. Of course, with your flash, you can do what's called flash exposure compensation to make your flash brighter or darker. And on that Speedlight, I think also there's a little white bounce card that you can pop up. And if you pop that up, and put your angle your Speedlight up totally vertically or at a slight angle, and bounce everything off the ceiling, you'll do well. And I think if that's what you're referring to, then yes, you turn off all of the light inside your room. However, if the Speedlight overpowers the other lights, then you can actually keep those other lights on to provide a warm atmosphere. Now your Speedlight produces what's called 5600 Kelvin. That's daylight. It's anywhere between 5200 and 5600, and that's pure white noonday light. This light is going to counteract, or sorry, it's not going to counteract, but it's going to be different than your bulb light that's in your house. So what a lot of people do is they actually get a little yellow gel, a little yellow piece of plastic. You can get these at any camera store, and place it over the flash. And then your flash color temperature is the same color temperature as your indoor lights. And this is very useful, especially in the evening when the light is low outside. You want all the lights on the inside, like if you have a party or a group of people, but you still feel that you need more light to get a group picture inside your living room. Then turn on all the lights, your normal household lights, get your flash, bounce that flash off the ceiling, but also make sure you have that little orange or yellow plastic gel. It's a see-through plastic. And that will make sure that your Speedlight light, the flash, is the same white balance as your interior lights. And then you're going to get a really good shot in your living room, if that's indeed what you were looking for. If I'm way off and you were looking for something else, just let me know. Okay, let's see what else we have. I was asking about Capture One for editing photos. Yes, I don't know, but please let me know, anyone, if you have any idea. Sheila, welcome. Raj, while photographing a bird, do we need to be continuous focus, AFC, and dynamic area mode, AF, in a Nikon DSLR? Yeah, I think that's wise. And of course, different birds react differently, but I would definitely suggest using autofocus continuous. And if anyone doesn't have that option or doesn't know what that is, just keep it on your default autofocus, because a lot of times the newer cameras, they have a default AF mode, which actually flips intelligently between continuous and single. Now, not all cameras have this, but newer cameras have it, and it's called AFA for some models. That's autofocus auto, 2 autos in there. And that is a dynamic scenario where the camera will recognize if a subject's moving or still. Now, if you don't have that, you have autofocus S, which is single, AFS, and that would be for stationary objects or slow-moving objects. And you would have AFC for fast-moving objects, especially in sports. And that is really good. So AFC would be useful for you for your bird photography. Now, dynamic AF area mode, AF, is simply it's very, very useful for and the word dynamic, if you're wondering what that is, it means movement. And newer cameras, probably cameras from the last 5 or 6 years, they have an extreme amount of intelligence, artificial intelligence built in, where they actually understand what is moving, what it is. Is it an object? Is it human? Is it an animal? Is it a car? And it'll be able to, your camera will be able to not only do adaptive focusing, but also adaptive exposure adjustments. So yes, you are right on. Raj Arti, keep going. Guide Pavel, good to see you. Hello from Toronto. I'm looking forward to getting back to Toronto. Okay, welcome Ukraine. Thanks everybody. I want sharp wave pictures. Yeah, so what I would suggest is, with regards to waves, at that, what you would probably want to do is flip over to what's called shutter priority. And that's S, or what is it in Canon? TV. That's for time value. And all you would simply do is just dial in 1/1000 or 1/500. Now, if you do that, keep in mind that if it's a dreary overcast day like you're talking about, then you're probably going to have to jack up your ISO. So feel free to just go to auto ISO. That makes it nice and easy. And with your 1/500 or 1/1000 shutter speed, you're going to freeze the action. And that's really good, especially if you have, water droplets coming off of the waves. And of course, you want to get as close as you can, because your 50mm is excellent. But of course, you're not going to get close enough to see the water droplets. So you would need a zoom lens for that. But you can get some really great landscapes, and that 1/1000 is going to freeze the wave action. So feel free to do that. So just remember, 1/1000, shutter priority, auto ISO. If you know your ISO really well, you can dial it in manually. So I would suggest, depending on how bright it is, it could be anywhere from 400 ISO to 1600 ISO. I'm just not sure how bright it is outside where you are. Hope that helped. Guide Pavel, Sony 85mm f1.8, possible for micro photography. So good question. And with regards to micro terminology, micro photography is usually reserved for the medical and scientific community, and macro photography is reserved for us as normal photographers. And that Sony 85 1.8 does a really good job of getting close to a certain extent, but it doesn't have an actual macro switch, I don't think. I could be wrong. I've never used the Sony 85 1.8. So I guess the best thing is just to do a quick Google search and ask that exact same question, because I don't know if that lens has a dedicated macro switch. Now, I know that it's not a professional macro lens. Now, a macro lens and a macro switch are different. A dedicated macro lens doesn't have to be expensive, but it is a lens that's specifically designed for close-up objects. Now, other lenses, non-macro lens, sometimes have what's called a macro switch, an on and off. And that will help you to a certain extent, but it's not true one-to-one macro. Okay, excellent. Good to see you all. If you just joined, we're doing Q&A session. Feel free to ask anything and let me know where you're coming from. My autofocus has a hard time focusing in dark scenes. How do I get it to autofocus? This is a problem that a lot of people have, and don't worry, it's nothing you're doing wrong. Most cameras, the majority of cameras in the world are what we call consumer version, and that's the kind that are could be $1,000 or less. And they struggle to photograph in the dark because autofocus struggles, because it needs a lot of light to focus correctly. So there's a number of factors going on. If you've ever wondered why a camera such as the Canon Rebel T7 series, or a cheaper Nikon, or cheaper, when I say cheaper, I mean inexpensive, why they struggle to focus and you can't get the picture, it's because it's either getting dark out or it's dim outside. Plus, the zoom lenses are not fast. The f-stop, usually the lowest f-stop is 5.6 or 4.5. So it's a really dark tunnel of light for the light to get through the lens into the camera. So focusing happens through a number of factors. The main factor usually is the camera needs to find texture or contrast in the scene in order to create the focus. And if the scene is too dark, then the camera cannot see any texture or see much focus, or see much texture or contrast. Therefore, it hunts for focus. You may have heard your lens go zzz, 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 back and forth. This is hunting for focus. And this happens when you're trying to autofocus on a white wall or a featureless wall, also when it's getting dark. You have to go to manual focus. You have to do it yourself. This is nothing wrong with your gear. You don't have to send it back for repair. It's simply that it's too difficult for the camera to focus. Now, how do you get around that? Well, if you want to get into what we call prime lens photography, that's a non-zooming lens, that will help. And the reason why it helps is because a prime lens is what we call a fast lens. The aperture is wide open, and you know that because the f-stop number is very low. So for example, let's just say that you have a zoom lens currently that's an f5.6, that's the lowest f-stop number. Well, you can get a prime lens that's f1.8 or 2.8 or f1.4, and that gives the camera the ability to see in darker environments. If the camera can see in darker environments because the lens aperture is wide open, then the camera can see texture. The camera can see detail to focus on. This helps a lot. And that's why you're having struggle autofocusing. And by the way, most cameras are set to default to not allow a picture to be taken until autofocus has achieved focus. That's why you're not physically able to take the picture, and it's really frustrating. So the camera's actually trying to look out for you. It's trying to make sure that it doesn't take a picture if it can't get that focus. Okay, so switch to manual focus. You will be all set. Okay, how do you feel about macro filters versus true macro lenses? Which macro lenses do you recommend for Nikon APS-C? Thanks. Yes, so I advise a two-step process. Because macro filters, or we call them close-up filters, are very cheap. I like to say, before you invest in an expensive macro lens, why don't you just get the filters for 10 bucks or 20 bucks and see if you even like macro photography. If you like it, if it's fun, if it's something that you really want to get into, then you would invest in what's called a macro lens. And a macro lens is specifically made to photograph close-up objects, small objects, and make them appear very large. It's very good for people who love insects, very good for people who do jewelry. And currently, I don't know what Nikon has for the APS-C lineup, but luckily it doesn't matter too much, because if all you need to do is pick any Nikon macro lens and it'll work. As far as I know, don't quote me on this, but I think all of the Nikon macro lenses are made for their full frame bodies. That means that if you ever upgrade or invest in a Nikon full frame, which is called FX, and your camera is called a DX, if you upgrade to an FX, you'll still be able to use that same macro lens. Okay, so just let me repeat. What you're looking for if you do buy a Nikon macro lens is you want an FX macro. That means that you can use it on a future full frame, or you can continue to use it on your APS-C DX camera. Okay, and which one? They're all good. They're all excellent. Doesn't matter. I would say get the one with the best deal. Okay, welcome everybody. That was such awesome advice. I'm going to go out and shoot right now. Nick Goalkeeper, excellent. You know what? It's the same way right here. It's very dull and dreary and raining, and that's why I'm inside. Have a good time with the wave photography. Okay, Photo Canuck, 50mm f1.8 prime lens with a macro filter. In your opinion, how does it work? Would be on a Nikon D750. Thanks from Black Falls, Alberta. It would be great. Now again, the macro filter has its limitations. It's not the sharpest on the perimeter, so you'll find that you'll have a good sharpness in the center circle of your image, but the macro filters are not the best on the perimeter. But again, I do suggest that you get those macro filters because they're a good gateway for you to gauge, do I want to really invest in the art of macro photography? So I would definitely say you'll be doing well with that 50mm f1.8 prime lens with a macro filter. Okay, let's see what else we have here. I'm going to pull up the question marks. And again, I'll try to go in order. And I don't want to miss anybody. If I've missed anybody, please let me know. Okay. Any recommendation for a less expensive lens for bird photography? Yes. Third party. So Tamron, Tokina, what are some other names? Samyang. And there's a Korean company, I forget the name of it. Young something, Y-O-U-N-G, and maybe if someone knows that they can just chime in. But the third-party third-party lenses, especially for longer lenses, they're way cheaper than Canon, Nikon, Fuji, and Sony. And also, you can definitely extend your birding photography with what's called a teleconverter. So you'd want a X2 or a ×2 teleconverter, and that will double the ability of your lens to be able to see that distant bird. So those are my advices. That's my advice. Okay. Shahir asks, is flash important for traveling photography? No, it's a waste of time. I never use it for traveling. And now there are street photographers who have carved out a real niche by using flash in their street photography, but it's very rare. And those who can do it, it's pretty impressive because it has a distinct look to it. But you know, 99% of the time you're not going to bother with flash. Don't even bother bringing it. Now, if you're traveling and you think that you're going to be doing other genres while you're traveling, then maybe you should bring it. However, I've never used it in my entire life as a travel photographer. So, hope that helps. Okay, see what else we have here. Out of camera flash, that must be a secondary question. Let me see. I'm trying to do, smoke photography. Okay, yeah, that's a different story, Alessandra. So what you're going to do for smoke photography is practice off-camera flash. So you're going to take your, by the way, if anyone didn't understand Alessandra's question, she's wondering about using flash indoors. because she's doing smoke photography. And the best thing, I think, is to get a remote release, and that could either be a cable or an optical release, so that when you take a picture of with your camera on a tripod of the smoke, your flash is actually on the other side of the smoke, almost as if the flash was pointing toward the camera lens. You're going to be off center about 45 degrees. And all you need to do is, find that way to get that remote flash going. Whenever we want to do smoke or special effect photography, and if the flash is on our camera, we tend to have the problem of the smoke or whatever looking flat and looking two-dimensional. But to get that 3D look, we actually take that flash off of our camera and place it to the side of the subject matter or behind the subject matter to a certain extent. And I will say that strobist.com is a great resource for off-camera flash. That's www.strobist.com. And by the way, what you're doing with the smoke photography, yes, it is very hard, but it's very cool. And especially when you get into, once you master that off-camera flash, you should start using gels. And these are colored gels, and you'll be able to make the smoke different colors. Especially, it's really cool when you get into multiple exposure colored gel smoke photography. Very good. Okay. Shahir, when should I send my camera for a service checkup? That's a really good question. I don't do a very good job, but I only send it when I have a problem. It's a tough call, Shahir, because if you live in a big city, then you can afford to get it done once a year. If you don't live in a big city, the problem is you have to ship it. Like, for example, I live on the East Coast, and Toronto, Canada is a 16-hour drive from me. And that means that, it'll take a day to get it couriered to Toronto, and then who knows how long it'll take in Toronto, and then shipped back, so I'm without a camera. So I usually just let it go until there's a problem. Now, I do have multiple camera bodies, so that's not an issue. If you live in a big city and you have a repair center, then yes, you can afford to get it done once a year. And it's a good idea. Get it cleaned, get it serviced. Okay. Let's see what we have here. Is the Sony a7 still good in 2020? So it's a little bit old technology. However, the interesting thing is that, and I mentioned this before, is that I look back at my history of photography, and especially if anyone remembers, if anyone remembers the Nikon the D300? I had the D300, and previous, I think I had the D3 or the D3S. This is the early days of Nikon's digital, and those pictures are still amazing. I'm really I'm just amazed at how good a quality those photos were a decade and a half ago. So the A7, yes, of course, it's going to be excellent. Now, it's not going to have the same advanced capacity and newer raw capacity than the most recent A7 series, but really, what does it matter? If you're going to get a good deal, then definitely get it. I always advise people to look for the better deal than to buy new. Look for the better deal. Never go into debt over photography. And you can really maximize the gear that you have. And don't upgrade until you find that the gear that you have is holding you back. So yes, my vote is yes. Go for that A7. Don't ever be afraid of used gear, everybody. Okay, let's see what we have here. From Buffalo. Camera Sony a7 II, shooting in aperture mode. What is the benefit of using back focus button? Should I learn to use it? This is a great question. Back focus button is really popular, and all that means is that, the way that we get focus normally by default is by pressing our shutter button down halfway. We have autofocus engaged, and when we press the shutter fully with our finger, then the picture is taken. However, you can also program your camera to have what's called back button focus. So that would be a function button on the back, and you can program it, by the way, as to which function you want in most cameras. And that back button is the trigger, in a sense, for creating the autofocus, or for starting or initiating the autofocus. Bird wildlife photographers love it. Some fashion photographers like it, some wedding photographers like it. It's purely up to you. There's no, as far as I know, there's no advantage over back button focus. For example, I don't use it because I've had 23 years of being used to the default, which is getting my focus from my index finger. And I've tried back button focus, but it's just, you know, I don't even bother using it because it's not wired in my brain. I have 23 years of wiring to use the normal default focusing. However, a lot of photographers swear by it, and I don't know why, but why don't you give it a try? And if you feel that you like it, then definitely go for it. And you can, by the way, you can program it so you have both back button focus and their traditional default focus on the trigger, on the shutter button. Now, I do understand some technicality. A lot of photographers don't want the risk of when they only want to press the shutter button to get the picture. I understand that. So that's why the back button autofocus, I think, was invented, so that you're not having one button serve two purposes. So currently, one button serves two purposes. When we press the shutter button, we have the autofocus first, then we take the picture. So yeah, I do see how sports photographers would really love that. So yeah, definitely give it a try. Great question. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, by the way, I only have 1 minute left. Throw in any last minute questions because I'm going to be cut off any minute now, says Instagram. Any advice when buying used gear, body or lenses? Shahir, yes. Used gear is awesome. Now, only if you have nearby you a big city with a reputable camera store, ask for a used warranty. That's key. And a used warranty is less than a new warranty. It's usually like a 30-day, 60-day warranty. That's fine. And just ask them in store for you to test it out. But usually, because their reputation is on the line, most camera stores that sell used will provide good equipment. And they will test it, and they won't let anything go out the door until they know it's going to work. And why? Because they don't want you going online and saying, I bought a crappy used camera from such and such a camera store when they said it was good. That's my advice. It's a little bit risky to buy person to person. It's doable. However, if you are not sure of gear, then I would suggest maybe asking your local professional photographer. Say, look, I'll take you out for beer, or I'll give you $20 if you just come with me to this guy's house to help me assess whether this camera system is worthwhile or not. Maybe that'll help. Okay, I do have to take off, everybody, because I only have 1 minute left and Instagram stops us at 60 minutes. So I would like to say thank you to everybody for joining. And tomorrow, hopefully, we'll be back outside. Hopefully, it'll be a sunny day. It's raining right now where I'm from. And by the way, this can be replayed on my Instagram stories right after, about 1 minute after. Plus, later today, I'm going to upload so many more of these Q&A sessions to my YouTube page. That's Mark Hemmings Photography School. That's on YouTube, okay? I hope all of you have a great day. God bless. Talk soon.